Hey there, today we will be working on integrating Cisco ISE with LDAP and LDAPS server on a Windows 2012 R2. Now integrating simple LDAP with the TCP port of 389 is pretty straightforward. You just need to know the IP of the LDAP server, the schema, a user credential, and the search-based DN, and you are pretty much good to go when it comes to integrating with Cisco ISE. Now when it comes to LDAPS or LDAP Secure, things are roughly the same except that it uses TCP port 636 and it uses certificates for secure communication. And the majority of this lab will revolve around LDAP Secure. So in this lab, we will first configure and integrate LDAP settings on port 389 with Cisco ISE. We will then look at the prerequisites when it comes to certificates on the Active Directory certificate store for a successful LDAPS communication to take place. Afterwards, we will thoroughly check each one of the prerequisites on the Windows Active Directory certificate store and see how each condition can be met. Finally, we will test the LDAPS integration with port 636 with Cisco ISE and also discuss some other options for added security when it comes to LDAPS. In the description of the video, I have timestamps, so if you want to go to a certain part of the tutorial, you can click on the timestamp and it will go directly to that part of the tutorial. And if I go too fast or too slow for you, you can adjust the speed of the video over here. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to leave a comment below this video. Let's get started. Okay, the first thing that we are going to be doing is we're going to be configuring LDAP with its default port, that is 389, without TLS. So here we are on our ISE GUI, and we type in our username. Hang on a second. Okay, admin, and the password for admin. And we're logging into ISE. Now what we're going to be doing is we're going to go into external identity sources, in which you can configure Active Directory join points and everything. And there's an option for LDAP as well. So we're going into administration and going into external identity sources and you have all these options, and what we're going to be configuring is LDAP. Now there is already an LDAP configuration in place. The point over here is that you can have multiple LDAP servers with obviously different IP addresses. We'll just leave this one as it be because it's been called in other policies. So let's add a new LDAP server. Now the first thing that we have to do is we have to specify a name for this LDAP identity source. We're going to call it doc_LDAP. Now this is important because we are going to be calling this name again and again in different policies. So this should be something that you can recognize once you're implementing the policies and stuff. Okay, the other thing is that we have Windows Active Directory acting as an LDAP server, so we have to specify that over here as Active Directory. Next up is the connection. Now when we go into the connections tab, we have these two columns, if you will. One is for primary server and one is for the secondary server. Now we only have one LDAP server, so we don't need to configure the secondary one. We don't have to even enable that because we don't have any other LDAP server acting as a failover. So what you could do, if you had another server, you have to enable secondary, and then you have to specify all the parameters associated with that server. But for the time being, we are not doing that because we don't have any other LDAP server apart from the one that we have, which is on 192.168.35.200. So the first thing they want us to specify is the host name or an IP address. Now, when we go to LDAPS, the host name does matter what you put in over here, but for the time being, we'll just put in the IP address of our LDAP server, which is the domain controller, and that is 192.168.35.200. And the default port is already selected, so you don't need to do anything with that. And now we need authenticated access, so we need an admin DN username and a password. So to get the admin DN, which we need to specify over here, and the password, let's hop on towards our Active Directory server. Notice that it says admin DN. Actually, there are two ways that you could do this. I'll just show you this way. That's much easier for you. First of all, this is our Active Directory server, and let's look at our users and computers. So I'll just grab a user. I'll just grab the administrator for this purpose, or actually I could go ahead and take any user. But I remember the password of administrator, so that's why I am using this one. So this is the administrator user. Now I don't know the DN or distinguished name when it comes to LDAP of this user. So what do I do? Well, there is actually a way you can actually get that by a command called dsquery user minus name, and then the username you want to get the DN for, or distinguished name for. So I'll just type in enter, and you can see this is the DN, and we have got that DN. How this works is basically you read it from left to right, so that you get to your search base DN, which is drnetworks.com basically. So we've got this DN, and we can just copy this and go back to our ISE and paste it right here and specify the password for it, which I always forget, but I hope I have not forgotten this time. These things, these parameters that you see here for the secure connection, they are all of LDAPS that we will cover in a little while. And then we have a test bind server that we can use to actually test the server if groups are being called or not. Now the problem here is that it cannot, LDAP bind succeeded, it succeeded, but the problem is that I cannot actually fetch groups, or because I don't have a base DN or a search DN defined. So that is on the next tab. Now going towards the directory organization tab here, I have to actually specify the subject search base and the group search base. Now the search base is the root of the tree. For all of those guys who don't have a very good understanding of the search base, I actually have an LDAP admin software installed on my PC, which can actually make a connection to the LDAP server, and then I can see the LDAP trees. So if you want to see the tree, like all the objects in it, like the organizational units, the CNs, containers, and the users, you can actually see that. But the main thing is that you can see your base or search DN over here, that is drnetworks, dc.com. So dc drnetworks dc.com. Now that is actually the search base DN that we have to specify over here. Now we already have that users DN copied, so I'll just omit all those things which are specifying the users attributes. So as you can see, now we have the tree built. So this is the top, so I can see each and every group in it now. So I just go into connections again, and I just hit test bind server, and you should be able to see the subjects and the groups. So if you want to be really clear on this, you can hit the groups tab, and you can go into groups and select groups from directory and click on retrieve groups, and there it is. You can see your groups over here. For example, I have some groups. There are a lot of groups over there, but as you can see, CN BYOD OU Doctor Networks _own container DC drnetworks.com. So you can actually go ahead, and if you want to cross verify over here, so you can go to this guy over here, and I think that this was the one, right? I guess so. This is basically a group container. And so this is how it works. So this is for cross verification. If you're sure and you know how LDAP works, you don't need to actually install this software that I'm showing you. It's just for my own understanding, and it just, you know, it's really good. So this is how LDAP only is configured. Now let's look at what are the prerequisites of configuring LDAPS? Okay, so here are the prerequisites or the checks on the Active Directory hosting the LDAP server must be met in order for ISE to communicate with the LDAPS server. These are kind of common. I mean, for any LDAPS client, they should be in place already. So the first one is LDAPS certificate is located in the domain controller's personal certificate store. Now, how do we see that? First of all, let's go to our Active Directory, and okay, I need to open up MMC, and then I have to go to File and Add Remove Snap-in Certificates, Add computer account, because I want all the certificates, not just associated to any specific user. So, and finish and selecting OK. So going to the certificates now, I have this personal folder, and in that folder I have some certificates. Now these are the certificates that will be used, I mean one of them will be used to facilitate the LDAPS client. But the question here is, which one will the LDAPS server be using from these 6 certificates? Well, to answer that, we have to go towards the Microsoft website, TechNet, and we have an article on LDAP or SSL LDAPS certificate. So basically, in the Active Directory Domain Services Certificate Storage section, it basically states that it uses the first valid certificate, and you may have some issues when you have multiple certificates. So the best resolution to that would be to delete all the unnecessary certificates from the local computer certificate store and have only one certificate that is valid for server authentication. Now, server authentication is also our prerequisite. We'll just focus on that too. As we can see, here it is. The enhanced key usage extension includes server authentication object identifier, also known as OID. And this is the same OID that you see over here. So server authentication should be enabled on the certificate as well. But the thing is that which certificate is my LDAPS server using? Well, first of all, let's look at that. That server authentication is enabled on this certificate, so most probably it is going to be using this certificate. Now, if you really want to be sure and you want to specify or hard code a certificate for only LDAP services, I'll leave a link of this document in the description below, because it states if you want to do that, if you want to bind a specific certificate with LDAP, then you can actually do that, and that is done with another way, where you actually use the service account. So this is the first time I have seen actually a use of the service account, because I'm not an AD guy, so I don't really know about these things. But you can actually do that if you wanted to. In our case, we're not going to be doing that. But I know this is the certificate that my domain controller is using. And you might ask, well, how do I know that? Well, there was a case actually. I actually Wireshark captured the connection of LDAPS between ISE and my LDAPS server, which is the Active Directory server, and I saw the server hello and the certificate over there, and you can too actually see that. And I saw the serial number that's ending with 000007, and I was like, okay, which certificate is that? So you can actually search that certificate if you go to certificates and you go to action, and what is action? View, where was it? I'm forgetting something. Wait a second. Find certificates. Okay, so I can search by serial number. So I type in 0007 and find the certificate. There it is. So I know that this was a certificate that my LDAPS or AD server was presenting to ISE. So immediately I knew this was the certificate I needed to target if I want to see if it's actually qualifying for the prerequisites for LDAPS. And the first prerequisite is that it should be in the personal store. And here it is in the personal certificate store. Okay, now we move on to the second check, which is a private key that matches the certificate is present in the domain controller store and is correctly associated with the certificate. Now let's hop on to our domain controller. And here we are. Now, the first check is clear. Now, the second check is there should be a private key associated with it. Now, by just looking at this, you have a private key that corresponds to this certificate, shows that there is a private key present, and it satisfies the second step. But the thing is, you might be thinking, where do you get this? Now, truth be told, my Active Directory is also, if I were to show you, not here, is also a certificate authority. Now, when you're making a certificate authority of from a domain controller, as you can see over here, certificate authority, it has that service enabled. So when I was doing that on the back end or on the front end, I don't know actually. I was just making this a certificate authority, and it basically maybe did ask me to actually make these certificates available. I didn't make these certificates, it did automatically. So they were already kind of created for me, but for you, they might not be present. And if you don't have them present on your Active Directory, and you may have a different certificate authority someplace else, or you have another Windows 2000X whatever server present that acts as a certificate authority. So what you could do is you could go into certificates, all tasks, advanced options, and create a custom request. And this is equivalent to creating a CSR, just like we did in the certificate installation of the Cisco ISE lab, the video I created before this on ISE. So hitting on next, you can proceed without enrollment policy. Next, you can create legacy, and I will leave a link in the description for you to actually see how it's done. You can actually search it in the YouTube as well. It's pretty easy to find, but I'll leave the link in the description. So here you can see private key. Before that, you have all these options to specify common name, email, organization units, all these stuff. So you can go ahead and add all of these. Oh, that's not a good a full DN. So the common name will be test.ldap, and you can also use the DNS, which is the alternative name, the SAN actually. So you can add SAN or something like that. So you can get granular because it's a CSR. And here you have the private key options, which I'm really not familiar with because I'm not a Microsoft guy, but I know that you can make the private key exportable from here. So you could export that. So once you go ahead and actually go towards the signing server, which is me in this case, cert srv. So let me just hit that. It could be another server. I'm not sure what your environment is, but it's got to be something like this. Okay, so this is a web services certificates services I'm running. So you actually go and put your CSR here and choose a certificate template which has the server authentication, which is our third step that I'll show you. And once you download that certificate and install that certificate in your personal store over here, it will correspond to the private key which was created in the CSR. So for our case, it's definitely okay. We have that private key a private key that corresponds to this certificate. Now here is check number 3. The enhanced key usage extension includes the server authentication OID or object identifier. Now it's turning out to be a Microsoft kind of a tutorial, but you know what? There's not a lot you have to do on ISE. You have to do everything, almost everything should be perfect on the LDAP server itself. So whenever you're creating or signing the certificate, there's this thing called the server authentication OID that should be present when you are stamping your certificate. As you can see, if I go to details in this certificate that is being used, and I scroll down a little bit, there is client key usage. You can see server authentication, and that is the OIDs. Now, where do you get those OIDs if someone is not from Microsoft? Like me, I'm not a Microsoft guy, but I know how you actually put this in. Here is a certificate authority, and in this certificate authority, we have certificate templates, if you will. And in those templates, you have these the intended purpose kind of thing. I'll just do manage. Now you have all these kind of templates. Now I'm not really familiar with this, but you already have some built-in templates as well for the web server. You have server authentication that will work because that is the one that you need. So how do you select this? Well, once you have that certificate, I don't have the certificate right now here, but it'll look something like this. So let me just see if I have any. Oh, there it is. I have an LDAPS CSR here. It'll look something like this, okay? Not necessarily this, but something like this. Okay, we will just paste that in over here. So you could select the web server and just submit it. And all right, so you got it. So you can now download the certificate, keep the file. And if you open that, you can see in the details here. What do you see? Where are those? There it is. Server authentication is a must that must be present. So OID is present there. Now, for our certificate that we have in our personal store, let me check that out. Where did it go? There it is. If I see that, I actually saw that, right? Well, let's see that again. Going down, up. Where is it? Where did it go? I think I selected this. Okay. So enhanced key usage. So this is the main key usage over here. So that satisfies the third prerequisite as well. Okay, it's time to move on the fourth check. The fully qualified domain name of the domain controller, for example, dc1testlab.com, must be present in the common name or SAN field. Now note that I have marked this fourth check as optional. I have marked that because if we go towards our ISE server here, we can actually go into connections, and here is where all the magic actually happens. So whenever you enable secure authentication, there are 2 to 3 things that you need to see. Now the first thing is that this is optional because if you specify a hostname over here on this hostname or IP address field, then if it doesn't matches in the certificate presented by the Active Directory in the SAN or in the common name, then it's not gonna work. It's gonna fail the TLS communication. Now this check is optional because you have the option to enable server identity check. If you have this enabled, then the common name or SAN should have this IP address or whatever host name you have configured over here to reflect that. Okay, so this is for the integrity check of the LDAP server in terms of certificate. Again, there are many layers you can add, but this is optional. You don't actually need to do that. But first, let's hop onto our Active Directory server here and see. Okay, issued to dn-80.docnetworks.com. Now, if I were to see the SAN field here, or the alternative name of the certificate, where is it? Subject, no, not this one. Where it is? Where is it? There is the DNS name, the subject alternative name, dn-80.docnetworks.com. Now, the thing is, my ISE server should be able to, first of all, resolve this. And for that, I will actually need an SSH connection. So typing in my username and password, which I don't even remember. Okay, I do remember, I think. Come on. Okay, there it is. So I should be able to ping dn-ad dot drnetworks.com. Okay. So this should be resolvable. Okay, so there it is. It is resolvable, sorry, because I have an entry on my DNS server for this specific DNS name. Now, if that is resolvable to that IP address, so I can actually use this over here, right? I can use this. Let's test it. Test the bind. Oh, sorry. It's generating an error because I'm trying to use TLS on my side. So I'll disable that. And it should be resolved. Okay, there it is. Great. Now, once I have this check enabled, this is the TLS one, and I have this enable server in identity check enabled, I will be able to actually authenticate that certificate because that will be the common name or in the DNS name of that certificate, and I will be able to cross-verify that certificate. Again, it's just a top layer security on top of LDAPS. You don't really need to do that, but I'm just trying to tell you what it is. So we're done with check number 4, I guess. Now it's time for check number 5. The certificate must be issued by a certificate authority or CA that the domain controller and the LDAPS clients trust. Now, LDAPS clients are the ISE server itself, and if there is a user LDAP client like me and trying to communicate with LDAP server, I must trust that certificate authority that signed this certificate, as you can see over here. So to see who actually issued this certificate, you can see it over here, Dr. Networks, and there is a certification path. So Dr. Networks is the one that actually issued this certificate to this AD. So we would need the root CA certificate of Dr. Networks. We will have to trust that in order for us to communicate, because it's just simple, right? If I don't trust the authority that signed your certificate, I'm not going to be trusting you. So who is your authority? Well, his authority is himself, actually. So if I go to certificate services, I can actually download a CA certificate or chain. So you could actually download this certificate, and that is the CA certificate. I'll show in folder. Cut that and put it on the desktop. Okay, put it there. Open that certificate and see this is the certificate of the root CA, which is Dr. Networks. Now, ISE needs to install this certificate in its certificate store. Now, if I were to go to ISE, it actually has the certificate installed already, and you have to refer to my other video, actually how to install the root CA certificate in ISE, and you can actually see how that works. But let me just submit this LDAP source and go to administration, certificates, and trusted certificates. Now there will be a certificate named DNCA Cert, which is actually the same certificate issued to Dr. Networks and issued by Dr. Networks. This is basically the root certificate authority, and you have to actually install it. It's just a simple import. There's no problem with that. You can refer to my other video lecture. I'll leave the link above here. Okay, so if you have that, that means you trust that root certificate authority that signed the LDAPS certificate, right? So that check is great. So we're kind of like close now. So now we have almost done everything we need. Just we need to configure some stuff on ISE. Let's do that and check our LDAPS or LDAP over TLS communication. Okay, so we're back on ISE, and it's time to really test LDAPS. So go into Cisco ISE and going to administration, external identity sources, going to LDAP, and the one that we configured was doc_LDAP. Now to enable LDAPS, we have to go into connection, and we have that hostname already specified. We firstly need to change the port number to 636. Now doing that alone won't make LDAPS happen, or LDAP over TLS happen. We actually have to go here and secure authentication and enable secure authentication. Now, this check we will discuss a little bit later. We have LDAP server root CA. Now what this is the root certificate authority, or the root certificate which signed the certificate of LDAPS server. So in our case, if you were to go to in the personal store and see the certificate path, it is this one. It is this guy. And we just downloaded this root certificate authority certificate over here, as you can see. And this is the same certificate that is already present in ISE. You can just install it via import. It's really easy to install it on the Cisco's ISE. And so the friendly name that we specified in our previous video was DNCA cert. So we have to select that, because that is the one, that is the root CA for the LDAPS server. Now, if everything's fine, I think it should work. I'm not sure. Ah, there it is. So it's working on 636. I said I'm not sure because I'm never sure, because there could be an issue. Maybe I missed the port number or something. Something could go amiss. You never know. Okay, so let's see this enable server identity check option. Now, if I enable this check option, it should work again. I hope so. Yeah, it is working. But the problem is, if I don't specify the host name or DNS name that is in the SAN of the certificate, and I specify only 192.168.35.200, I do that, it's gonna fail. And that is because you have specified enable server identity check. So the certificate common name should be the same, or the SAN name, at least the SAN name should contain this IP address, and our certificate doesn't. So if I were to go into the certificate I just showed you, our certificate doesn't actually show that. Over here, if I go to details, man, I get lost. Okay, there it is. So I don't have any IP parameter defined here. I should have, but I don't have. I only have one parameter defined over here. So that is why I need to define that same parameter. If I could, okay, there it is. Control Z works here. I didn't know that. Okay, so this is how it's gonna work. So it's gonna check the server identity via the SAN or the common name. So this is how you actually configure LDAPS. Now, one thing I think I'm forgetting is issuer CA of ISE certificates. What is that option? That's the only option we left out. This is an option if you want to also authenticate the LDAPS client, which is ISE in this case. What will happen? The same thing will happen for the LDAPS client. As in, I will present my certificate, or the ISE will present its certificate to the LDAPS server, and LDAPS server will look at my root certificate authority. In other words, who signed my certificate. If that certificate is present in the Trusted Root Certificate Authority stores over here, which is obviously present already because it is the CA that I'm working with, then it won't be an issue. It will authenticate. But the thing is, that's optional. As this is optional, you can actually uncheck this and it'll still work. This is optional, and this is also optional. And if you want to do that, Microsoft has this the same article that we went through, enabling LDAP for client authentication. In it, you can actually see this paragraph, enabling LDAPS client for client authentication. You can actually look into that. If you want an extra layer of security, it is not necessary. And by the way, there's also a guide on Cisco's website, which actually specifies the same thing, and it's really not easy to understand, but it's a really great article. There are some drawbacks actually of using LDAPS, and I should have actually mentioned this before, but actually I may mention this before because I make the video first and I make the intro after. So EAP MS Chat version 2 is not supported with LDAPS, and you might be saying, oh, that's a problem because you may have BYOD or .1x and things like those. So that's not going to work. You're absolutely right. You cannot do that. So there are some drawbacks. Of using LDAPS, but it's mainly used where you cannot actually join the AD. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.